people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. A card that feels like it snuck up on us. What's supposed to be the Oscar Valdez versus Liam Wilson WBO title fight that will feature Seniesa, Estrada, yada, 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 yada.
Who I love.
And Yokasta Valle in what is the undisputed minimum weight title fight, title tilt. It took a long time for us to get here. This is just a refresher because I've talked about this fight several times already.
I have Seniesa winning the fight.
Seniesa is very special. And you often hear that said about good fighters, really good fighters. Seniesa is a great fighter, and I believe that's what separates her from Yokasta Valle. Yokasta's good, but Seniesa is great. The fight we're going to see this Friday.
And what is a full weekend of fights.
The Top Rank show on Friday, the PBC pay-per-view on Saturday, and the Boxer show on Sunday.
Fraser Clark versus Fabio Wortley.
Great fights, great cards, all of them. This card will kick off this weekend's festivities. And as I've said several times already, I have Seniesa winning the fight, and I have her winning the fight potentially in lopsided fashion. Though if it turns out to be lopsided, it should not be interpreted as Yokasta not being any good. Yokasta not being a good fighter. She's a good fighter. Seniesa is just better. Better in every way, better all around. Sporting a professional record of 25 wins with no losses, no draws, 9 knockouts.
31 years old, the same as Yokasta Valle.
Little taller, a little longer.
Are you sure about that? BoxRec has Seniesa registered at 5'2" and Yokasta at 5'4".
Yeah, but BoxRec's measurements for a fighter's height and a fighter's wingspan aren't always accurate. If you've seen these fighters in action, you'll know that Seniesa is a little taller and a little longer than Yokasta Valle.
Yokasta Valle, who sports a professional record of 30 wins with 2 losses, no draws, 9 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 32 professional bouts.
She may have the same number of recorded knockouts as Seniesa Estrada across more fights, but context is key. Seniesa is the bigger puncher of the two, the noticeably bigger puncher of the two. They share a common opponent in Maria Santizo that would service as a prime example, where Seniesa Estrada dispatched Maria Santizo in something like 3 or 4 rounds, took her down, and took her down hard. Yokasta Valle had a full-on war with that same Maria Santizo, landed right hand after right hand after right hand, and she couldn't put her away.
She couldn't stop her.
What tells the story is that Yokasta Valle landed a large number of power shots, power punches on that same Maria Santizo, but they didn't have the same effect on Maria that Senesia's punches had on Maria. And the same is true of all their common opponents, of which they share 4 or 5.
She knocked them all out?
No, Seniesa didn't knock all of them out, but she dominated them in much, much better fashion than Yokasta did. She beat them in better fashion. That's always the case with all of their common opponents. Where Seniesa Estrada knocked out Maria Santizo and knocked out Jennifer Leon, forced her to retire on her stool, Yokasta Valle went the distance with the both of them, where Seniesa Estrada thoroughly dominated Annabelle Ortiz. It was more of a contest with Yokasta, and where Seniesa beat Tina Ruprecht in one-sided fashion, Tina actually beat Yokasta, and Yokasta never avenged the loss.
So you see what I mean? They got a lot of common opponents, but what's consistent is that Seniesa always beats them in better fashion.
You often hear it said that triangle theories don't work, and triangle theories rely on one common opponent, but once you've got 4, it's not a triangle anymore.
What that means is that one fighter's just better than the other. That's what it means.
Seniesa Estrada makes me proud to be from East Los.
You're not from California.
That's not the point. The point is that Seniesa Estrada has already proven over time that she is a better grade and a better caliber of fighter than Yokasta Valle, and this is just the cherry on top, the icing on the cake, that it's 4 undisputed.
Even better.
But make no mistake, I have Seniesa winning the fight. I still have her winning the fight. I still have her winning it in lopsided fashion, not because Yokasta's not good, but because Senesia's just better.
Better in every way, better all around.
She is a better physical specimen, stronger, faster, and more athletic, as well as a little taller and a little longer. Nuts and bolts boxing, she's more fundamentally sound than Yokasta Valle, and we'll give the fight a closer look as the fight date approaches.
There's big fights to be made. Terence Crawford as well on the list.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, that's greatness right there, you know, pound for pound type status. So, yeah, we'll see what the future plans, but I've got one big task ahead of me right now, and I'm solely focused on that. I'm easy to make things happen.
Yeah.
You know, simple, very simple. You know, so it's not my side that's making trouble. We can make it happen.
The latest seems to indicate that pound-for-pound champion Terence Crawford versus Tszyu is already in talks to potentially happen next. Tszyu's manager, Glenn Jennings, has revealed fight would be for Tszyu's WBC and WBO super welterweight world titles if he beats Sebastian Fundora on Saturday night.
One thing I've always liked about Tszyu is he seems to like his job.
Fighting is in his blood, and he likes to fight. He doesn't shy away from the challenges, wherever they may come from, in whatever form. This fight that he's about to have is a prime example. Sebastian Fundora really is the polar opposite of who he was supposed to be facing in Keith Thurman. A small guy, a mover.
Whereas Sebastian's a big guy and a swarmer.
He was initially preparing for an orthodox fighter this weekend. He's going to be facing a southpaw. With the kind of notoriety that he's already amassed in the last 3 or 4 years in his native Australia, he doesn't actually have to travel. He wants to, but he doesn't have to.
He seems to relish these opportunities to prove his worth and prove his mettle, show his mettle.
Test it. Unlike so many American prima donnas, so many American princesses that are supposed to be pugilists, always trying to be something else, whether they're real estate agents or rappers.
Reality TV stars or TikTokers.
Tszyu is a fighter. He doesn't pretend to be anything else. He's a cup of black coffee without all the foam.
Without all the sissy shit.
And I like that about him. I've always appreciated that about Tszyu. He knows what his job is, and he seems to enjoy doing his job as he further enhances his international profile. He could have sat in Australia having fights in Australia. None of these other guys at 154 have a domestic following how he has a domestic following, and yet he's here.
You can't complain.
On the other side of this weekend's fight lies an even bigger one with an even bigger name, so let's get right down to it. What are Tszyu's chances this weekend against Sebastian Fundora? I will say that this is a more dangerous fight under these circumstances than the Thurman fight would have been, because in Thurman, you're talking about a naturally smaller fighter in his mid-30s who hasn't boxed in 2 years.
Ring rust.
For all of the would-be Burt Sugars who want to talk about how skilled Keith Thurman is, how skilled he is. Skill is something you have to maintain.
Like a physique or a credit score. It's something you have to keep up. It's something that requires maintenance. And when you haven't fought in 2 years, your skills now aren't what they may have been 2 years ago or 4 years ago.
They're not. So understand that the Keith Thurman fight was all but a foregone conclusion. Keith was going to get knocked out. He dodged a bullet, whereas Sebastian, it's a more dangerous fight because it's a short notice fight against a bigger, younger fighter who leads with the opposite hand. And that's not what Tim was getting ready for. The saving grace
is Tim already has the ingredients to win a fight against a guy like Sebastian.
They're both pressure fighters, you understand. They're both mid-range to inside pressure fighters,
Yes.
volume punchers,
Yes.
that throw a lot of punches and show a lot of aggression
Yes.
in a round. So they won't have to work too hard to find each other in there.
How does that help Tim?
Well, Sebastian Fundora, as big as he is, he gives up his height to smaller fighters. He gives up his height, his length, to bang on the inside. So even though he's very tall and very long, he doesn't use it.
He fights like he's 4'11".
Fights like he's in a crawl space when he really doesn't have to. And that leaves him open for punches, open for shots, body shots, under the elbow, uppercuts, up the middle.
His defense is leaky. You know it is. Erickson Lubin sat him down. Brian Mendoza knocked him out.
And that was almost a year ago. Sebastian didn't have a rebound fight. He didn't get himself back in the winner's bracket. He didn't get back out there to work on things and tighten up. He didn't do any of that. You're coming off a knockout loss to a puncher to go right back in there close to a year later against another puncher.
It's not good.
I think Tszyu is a bit more methodical with his pressure fighting. More methodical, more defensible, and what he has to do is catch and shoot on his way in. Stay behind that high guard until you're close enough to counter, and once you do, you let him have it. At that range, the shorter fighter with the shorter arms can deliver his punches faster than a taller, longer guy because he doesn't need as much room to work.
And Sebastian's long arms, even behind a high guard.
There are big holes there. Big holes around the side, up the middle.
Down the middle.
The solar plexus. We just saw what Dalton Smith did to Jose Zepeda by targeting his solar plexus with that big right hand.
I favor Tszyu to win.
By way of knockout, because it's a short notice opponent. Because you didn't have much time to prepare for the guy, I feel like he's going to have to work for it. But in the end, I think he's going to take Sebastian Fundora out.
They're both pressure fighters.
The victory may be determined by who can show a bit more of a boxing brain. Even though Tszyu and Sebastian are both mid-range to inside pressure fighters, Tim is a lot more methodical with his pressure than Sebastian. Sebastian's wild.
Not in a good way.
It's pressure fighter versus pressure fighter, but I think Tim stops him, I do.
Because I think he's better with that base style.
Beyond that lies a Terence Crawford fight. That's a fight that I don't favor Tszyu to win. I don't favor him to win that fight.
Different stylistic matchup with a more experienced fighter than any fighter Tszyu has been in there with.
A better fighter than any fighter Tszyu has been in there with.
Terence Crawford.
Maybe asking yourself, you seem pretty sure of Tszyu, so how could you be sure that a naturally smaller, older fighter in his mid-30s who isn't really all that active within a calendar year, how could you be so sure that Terence Crawford beats him?
Terence is special.
May seem like a vernacular that is often overused in the sport, but Terence Crawford is the genuine article. He is that very special fighter, and the really special fighters, the good ones, they don't just have one base style, they have two. What makes them elite beyond all others is that they are more adaptable than all others. So most of the time you see Terence, he might have the look of an economic pure boxer, but because of his mean streak, he might often toggle from the pure boxer to the boxer puncher. And it just so happens a pressure fighter's kryptonite is a boxer puncher.
Why?
Well, a boxer puncher, they've got a bit more spite than a pure boxer. A boxer puncher isn't just going to concede real estate and let you push them around. A boxer puncher will meet your aggression with aggression.
Counterpunching.
That is the pressure fighter's kryptonite. Counterpunching. An opponent who's not going to run away, not going to stay all the way out there on the outside, trying to fight from a safe distance. A fighter that's going to sit there with them, stay on them, and catch and shoot, catch and counter.
Push that pressure fighter back.
Pressure fighters, in a very general sense, are not that good on the back foot. If you put them on the back foot, they're like a deer in the headlights. They're used to being the bully. They're not used to being bullied.
Nobody bullies Terence Crawford.
Fucking right.
We've seen Terence in there with pressure fighters. Pressure fighters at 135, pressure fighters at 140, 147. He fought one of the better pressure fighters at the weight at the time, in Ray Beltran. Very tough guy.
Top 3 in the division at the time. One of the top 3 fighters at the weight when he fought him. We saw Terence in there with another pressure fighter at 140 in Felix Diaz. Olympic gold medalist Felix Diaz.
A high-risk, low-reward guy at the time. A hot potato. He was calling for a Crawford fight, and he got it.
And of course, Sean Portier, up there at 147, one of the more formidable pressure fighters at 147. He stopped him. I told you then, I told you before the fight even happened, that Terence Crawford would be the first and only fighter that stops Sean Porter. Now, the difference between those pressure fighters and this pressure fighter is that Tszyu would be the biggest guy, the biggest pressure guy that Terence will have ever faced. He's a bigger guy, he's a younger guy.
He's stronger than him.
Punch for punch, he's a stronger puncher than Ray Beltran, stronger puncher than Felix Diaz, stronger even than Sean Porter. Punch for punch, Tim does pack a bigger punch than they do.
So it may be a tougher assignment a riskier one.
Though still winnable. For me and my money, it's a winnable fight for Terence Crawford because Tim, God bless him, he's not going to have Terence's timing or shot selection. The instincts that Terence has developed over time, fight by fight. Most of the fights he's been in are champion-level fights. Championship level.
His boxing brain.
His toughness, his timing, his speed. Maybe thinking to yourself, but the guy's in his mid-30s. With Terence, unlike some other fighters who are in their mid-30s, you don't really have to worry too much about the gradual decay of time because he's always in the gym. He's always sharpening up. He's always working. You don't have to worry about him fucking around.
Terence doesn't fuck around.
He'll fuck you up.
He'll fuck me up if I say the wrong thing.
Terence doesn't fuck around. With Terence against Tim, what I see is Terence wouldn't just concede real estate, all the real estate, the same way a pure boxer would. No, he'd stay with Tszyu behind a high guard, catching and shooting.
Uses aggression against him by punching in between.
Often underestimated, Terence Crawford is a very strong fighter, physically strong, lots of core strength and lots of power in the shot, in the punch. For years I told people he's a lot stronger than he's given credit for, and I suspect he's a lot stronger than Errol Spence Jr. We saw that play out last year with Tszyu.
He'd be strong enough for Tim, because Tim's not really the biggest junior middleweight.
I mean, he's a solid fighter. He's a solid kid at 154, but he's not one of the more physically imposing junior middles in terms of height and length and size. That in mind, because he's not that big, I think Terence would be able to manage the distance at which the fight is being fought behind the jab and the counter.
Could he hurt Tim?
I think he could. It wouldn't surprise me. I would heavily favor Terence Crawford to win that fight. If he did, he would in effect become a 4-division, current reigning, unified champion.
He'd surpass Inoue on my list.
There was a raging debate last year as to who deserved to be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport, Inoue or Crawford. And on the basis of Inoue having been a 2-time undisputed champion just like Terence, but having been a champion at more weights than Terence, Inoue's been a champion in 4 divisions, whereas Terence has only been a champion in 3.
If he improves upon that and becomes a 4-division champion, he will surpass Naoya Inoue on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list and be ranked at #1.
I believe he can do it. All he has to do is wait out the outcome of this weekend's fight, and all Tszyu has to do is what Brian Mendoza already did.
Beat Sebastian Fundora.
There are other particulars, other questions pertaining to such a fight between Tim and Terence. Where should the fight take place? Should it happen here in America, or would it be bigger, more of a draw, maybe even a stadium fight in Australia? You could do this at Marvel Stadium. If George Kambosos versus Devin Haney was at Marvel, you could do this at Marvel.
Questions.
What would it do at the box office? What would it bring in on pay-per-view? Here in America, I'm sure it would sell well in Australia, where Tim is already a pay-per-view attraction, but what about here?
300, maybe 400,000.
Modest estimate, guesstimate. I'd put the number at between 3 and 4, maybe more, if Tszyu knocks out Sebastian in violent fashion this weekend and goes viral. That would lend itself to the fight's promotion.
When does it happen?
Over the summer months, I would imagine. If Tszyu takes care of business in March, you could do this fight sometime in July.
Won't that have been a year's time since Terence's last fight?
It would, but I'm not too worried about that because he's been on that kind of schedule for at least 3 years now.
Fighting once a year?
We'll see what happens.